lead this. This is our panel on faith, love, compassion, is Zeena Regis. Zeena serves as the Director of Faith Engagement, Priority Populations at Compassion and Choices. Prior to her role there, Zeena served as a hospice chaplain and grief care coordinator. She is on the faculty of Columbia Theological Seminary's Older Adult Ministry Certification Program. And in addition to having a Master of Divinity from Columbia Theological Seminary, she is also a playwright. And her latest work, A Free Black Woman's Guide to Death and Dying, was selected for the Synchronicity Theater Arts Incubator Project and premiered in 2022. Yeah. Zeena Regis, congratulations on that. And let's bring up Zeena Regis to talk to her great panel.
Dr. Jeff, I'm going to take you everywhere that I go.
Don't tell my wife.
I just want to say, I feel so full after today. So many people ask me, how can you talk about death and dying professionally all day long? But really talking about death is talking about life. Yeah. Talking about our story, our values, our priorities, and our faith. And so faith has been woven through so much that we've talked about today. So we're going to talk about it. This is what our panel is all about today. And I can't imagine a better panel than the one we have assembled today. And I think all of these people have Beyonce's 24 hours because they do so much more than us normal people. So I'll start first with Reverend Dr. Roslyn Satchel, who is a scholar, an activist, a mother, an author, a professor, a lawyer. And she is the faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard Law School, and so much more. Like I said, Beyonce's 24 hours that she has. We also have Reverend Thomas Bowen, who is the Director of African American Strategic Engagement in the Executive Office of Mayor Muriel Bowser here in DC. And also the Earl L. Harrison Minister of Social Justice at the historic Shiloh Baptist Church here in DC. We also have Reverend Kevin E. Taylor, and he's the senior pastor of the Unity Fellowship Church Newark in Newark, New Jersey, and also the director of LGBTQ services for NJCRI in Newark, as well as the acting director of development, donations, and communications there. Another Beyonce's 24 hours. And we have Reverend Charles McNeill, and he's the pastor of Unity Baptist Church here in DC, as well as the past president of the National Capital Baptist Convention in DC, the chair of the 2022 National Baptist Convention, and also the president of the Washington Baptist Ministers Conference of Washington, DC. So I am so grateful for this panel assembled here. Dr. Malveaux mentioned 50% of African Americans having church attendance, but also in the recent Pew Research 2021, 97% of African Americans say they believe in a higher power, and 8 out of 10 say that prayer and religious reflections are very important when they make decisions. And what more important decision than is our end of life, that holy and sacred time. So I wanted to just turn to you and see how might clergy and faith leaders lead this conversation of end of life planning. And we can start with you, Reverend Dr. Satchel.
Sure. Thank you so much, Zeena. I really appreciate you and the work that you and Kim and Brandy are doing. It's such a joy and such an honor to be a part. I have some wonderful stories I can tell, but what I think one of the most important pieces that stood out for me from the morning speakers, and quite honestly, it's truly an honor to just be assembled among them. But there's this untreated trauma in the Black community that plagues us and it colors our experience when we're talking about end of life planning, when we're talking about advanced care planning, when we're talking about funerals and the emotions at funerals and bedsides, untreated trauma. So part of what we have to do as the Black church, and I say that because, you know, I'm an itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I've been that for probably, I'm not gonna age myself here, but just trust me. No, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of every year of the 50 years, right? So being in ministry now for almost 30 years, I've had an opportunity to see people at their best and at their worst, and to love them through, right? Like there's an amazing quote that we usually share within the community. If you don't love the people, you will betray the people. It's been accredited to many people, but I think the truth of it is there. If we don't love the people, we don't learn about the people, we don't learn about the culture, we will never be able to affect the people or the culture or the community. Unfortunately, Black folks have largely, and again, as our panelist earlier today mentioned, when I say Black, I refer to the larger global diaspora of people of African descent. And I don't use terms such as African American because they can be exclusive. They can exclude members of our community from the conversation. So unless I'm being particular to the experience of formerly enslaved people on American shores, I don't use African American. And I would encourage us to think about our brothers and sisters who are outside of Christianity, right? Who are outside of American culture. And that is a part of our responsibility. And it's also a part of the opportunity that comes to us to understand where our rituals and traditions and cultural resonances come from. I had some of my students over to my house for Sunday dinner. They tend to just kind of show up. At Pepperdine, that became my tradition. Now that I'm in Georgia, it's my tradition there. And what I'm seeing is those conversations, those easy conversations around the dinner table on a regular day make all the difference in the world. My dad, I talked about in the video, did all the things. He wrote the obituary, wrote the funeral program, had all the insurance policies together, had it all laid out, had powers of attorneys done, had to go over the wills and trusts and everything with me multiple times. But see, there was something else that he did. It was the normalizing of the conversation so that when my son was born, and I'm trying to figure out so many things as a person parenting alone, it was my daddy. It was my daddy, the apple of my eye, who said, don't worry about a thing. We've got him. You see, here, I did this, I changed this, I added his name to this, and it's all. So it wasn't just at the funeral or by the hospital bed, it was at the birth. It was a part of life. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't like it all the time. But when I was able to sit up there and go, Daddy wanted this song sung at the funeral, at this point in the service, and he wanted this person to preach. He even asked me to preach. I was like, Dad, I'm gonna be a mess. Really? You really want me to preach? I can't give you that, Dad. I don't know that I'm even. He said, you know what? You're right. I'm gonna ask so-and-so. That was great, because if he had asked so-and-so and not asked me, my was hurt. You know. So all these things to say, we've got to normalize the conversations. And I just wanted to share a little bit of the ways in which we can do that lightheartedly, with a smile, in a normal, average, ordinary day. And it can make the world of difference in the life of a family that otherwise would not know what to do. Partnering with psychologists and mental health professionals is really important when you recognize that there is untreated trauma in a family. And all too often, unfortunately, many of our colleagues in ministry do not do that. We don't admit when we can't do something, and we need to. We're not all skilled equally, but we can equitably bring people in as needed for the skills and resources that they can bring. Now, I'm hoping we get a chance to talk about allocating resources later, so I'm gonna hush.
Thank you so much.
You know, the
Dr.
person get to
Ross.
going, I'm sorry, I just
Uh-huh.
got things to say.
Reverend Bowen.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Compassion Choices for this forum, for dedicating needed resources to the Black community. Dare I say African American right now? And they've done this for years, and that's good. It's not my first rodeo with Compassion Choices. Thanks to Mr. Jarvis Stewart, we were able to hold a discussion a few years ago at a bank. It seems to me that, well, one thing is you cannot judge Black folks' religion by how many times they go to church in a month,
Yeah.
because the fastest growing denomination is now brunch.
Mhm.
You can't judge by attendance. What I do know that still, when young couples want to get married, they look to a nice church. What I do know is that when someone dies, they're looking at a church, but the question always becomes, where did you hold your membership? So I think that the Black church has to get beyond just giving services that they give to their members, and they have to give it to the wider community. That becomes an invitation to come and be in fellowship with the church, as the church now post-COVID is trying to find out in what direction are we headed here on earth before we get to this place called heaven. I think that we skipped to the last question among Black folk. And the question that we have when death occurs is, who got the body? But we miss everything before that. It seems to me that the people who are most prepared for end of life are those who have decided in their minds that they want to be cremated, because they want to ensure that their desire is followed through. And the way they desire is they have to write it down. So those are the folk that I've seen who are just one step further than most folk. It's been said over and over again, we are all going to die. We did not come here to stay. One day this world will not be able to afford our souls a home. And what's going to happen at that point? We think to say death is to send a gold-sealed invitation to death to come to our houses. And that's just not the case. And I like the fact of normalizing. There's so many conversations that we have to have in Black families. And so add to the list, along with what to do and stop by the police, is what to do when I'm no longer here. And it has become a comfortable conversation. So I applaud you on your play and putting it there. Perhaps we can get Kenny Leon to direct it, right? But I think that the church has missed on an opportunity because being at a church where I am now, 20 plus years, I'm in the death business. I've done lots of funerals. I've done over 100 funerals, right? I go to several funerals throughout the week still. Buried my mom last month. And in some cases, it's business, other cases more personal, but in trying to deliver a eulogy or help people during that time, I try to make it as much as an intimate and religious experience as possible. But we do it on a weekly basis, and we miss out on an opportunity. Thankfully, a place like Shiloh, we help families. We also have a mutual aid society. We have an investment club. So we have people to think about the end of life, and we miss out on the wealth of the church. And the wealth of the church is knowing that on any given Sunday that a Dr. Malvo is in the audience. So there are people there, and our church is full of lawyers. There's no reason why we should not have a legal clinic to help people with their wills, or avail ourselves of Compassion Choices option of having that free will on their site. But I think we miss opportunities because we think about the one question, who got the body? And we all be thinking about everything that occurs before that point.
Well, thank you so much.
Good afternoon. I'm grateful to be in this space. This is healing and purposeful work, especially for me because I am from the city. I don't live here any longer, but I was born and raised in DC. So a number of things are coming up for me. I want to thank Compassionate Choices for reconnecting me to my friend Michael Joyner, who I know from my professional life creatively, who connected me to Compassionate Choices, and you, Zeena, and Brandy, and to Osha. And I bring up that creative side because it is where this stuff came up for me pastorally, ministerially. In 2001 of January, I was ordained into the office of pastor. I was still senior producer at BET. And in August of 2001, I joined Aaliyah on her final shoot in Abaco, Bahamas. Because I had to preach in Baltimore, they put me on an earlier flight. And by the time I landed in Baltimore, Aaliyah and 6 people we had spent 3 days with had transitioned. And that had its stuff with it that of course brought up mortality. And it was a week left given to me to grieve, to deal with all the stuff in the media, a week to grieve, and then I was back at work for a week, and then there was, are you ready to go back out? And because, we don't know how to deal with trauma, we just kind of brush it off. 18 days later, I got on my first flight. The night before, my boss called and said, they have you leaving out of Newark. That's stupid. You live in Harlem. Let me get you out of LaGuardia. So on Tuesday, September 11th, I boarded a plane again and made my way to Los Angeles. We were put down in Kansas City, only to find that the flight I was taken off of from Newark hit Tower 2. And so mortality came real quick in the conversation thereof, right? But somebody say, but I didn't deal with it. I didn't deal with it. I didn't want to, right? And it wasn't until 2.5 years later, the young man came into my life who is now my son, who is now giving me grandchildren. When I adopted him, I thought about, what do I want to leave him? Because I also thought, what is he thinking every time I leave the house? Because, you Googled me, there was always this stuff, these articles about, the one who didn't die. And so the conversations about normalizing this just leapt from the pulpit for me, right? And what helped me to frame it was, wait for it, church folk, decency and right order. It just helped. Did everything under the umbrella of, what would happen if I left on a Saturday for a quick shoot and didn't come back? What would be the succession order for the church? What would be the plan for taking care of my son? What would happen to my mom, at the time, who was still alive? And so it just made it easier. And the more you live life, the more we live life, the easier it became. Being back here again, I deal with the fact that in 2015, I buried my mother, and I buried her. I eulogized my mother because my brothers were like, well, if Reverend Allen's sick, Mama don't want nobody up there but you. And all I could think of, anybody preacher, all I could think of is somebody get up there and do a sermon when what we want is a eulogy about her good life. I'm gonna knock them out the pulpit and do it myself. So I might as well do it myself, right? And so the do it myself conversation is what has helped with a lot of this. It's like, hey, I made the plan with the funeral home. Let me talk to them about coming to church. I'll do it myself. Let's just come, we did those dessert talks you can do after service. Bring somebody from the funeral home to help somebody do funeral planning. We've got a wills thing that we do every second Sunday to make sure your paperwork's in order. It's just to normalize it. You do anything with Black folk over folk, it'll be normal. You do it over food, it's going to be normal. And so you just always bring out some paper plates and some good fried chicken, and people will stay for the difficult conversations until they're not as difficult anymore, right? Because at the end of the day, so many of the conversations we've been having earlier talk about the stuff that we all squawk about, right? If relatives can fight for 3 and 4 days over, Mama wanted me to have her plates, Mama wanted me to have her fight for, that means y'all were having conversations about Mama not being here. So where's that? Where is that? It's as simple as, when we were doing Compassion Sundays, it was like, let's just develop bookage and have common talk and just start with Mama, what song do you want sung? What dress do you want to wear? Who you don't not at Reverend Jackson, I like him, but don't let him speak over my body. He's gonna talk to him and he's gonna quote all the scripture wrong and he just laugh it out. And then she says who she wants, and the next thing you know, you've planned the whole service. The next thing you know, you've had a couple of conversations with your parent or sibling or spouse that you hadn't even planned to have. They've got games like that now for siblings and for children and their parents, because a lot of us let people leave with treasure troves still in them of stories we never heard. And I'm gonna close with it. My mom, born right here in DC. My mother was born in Edwards, Mississippi. And one day, for no reason that I understood, my mother called me when I was leaving the movie theater on a Tuesday afternoon, and she said, baby, what you doing? I said, I just came from seeing The Help. She said, is that movie about the Mississippi washerwomen? I said, yes, ma'am, it is. And she said, did they have a sass mouth in the movie? I had never in her whole life heard my mother use the word sass mouth, but that is literally what they call Miss Minnie in the movie. I said, yes, ma'am, they did. And my mother proceeded to tell me the story about her and my grandmother working for this white family in Mississippi. The white woman got a new washer. She still wanted them to wash the clothes down by the lake. And she said, and mama said, well, either we're going to use this at 15, either we're going to use this new wringer to wring out these clothes, or I might have to wring your neck. And my mother was out of Mississippi before the weekend because they were like, but then that just opened up a couple of conversations about her life and the stuff that she had lived. And in doing so, it just opened up the conversation of, that song, that song by that bishop. That's the one I want sung at my funeral. And if you can, have that girl from your church sing it, because I like her. And it just made it all lighter, and that conversation happened several years before her transition. And so doing that, y'all know, we had these conversations when Whitney dies, when Aretha dies, we have them. So let's just go ahead and have them. And what I love about Compassion and Choices is you're doing the work to give people the paperwork. Because all you got to do is push record on your phone and talk to your mama. Then you can go back to the paperwork and fill stuff in. And then we can just start moving this journey along that deals with something. I've heard the word several times today, that deals with the trauma that death can bring up in us, that we might have life and have it more abundant.
Yeah.
I don't know how to follow all that.
We all preachers, you got something in your pocket. He sat up, he saw that.
Well, I used to be a cop here in DC. And my wife was cop, and we transitioned to the federal. And during our time as police officers, we had to look at, what we will be leaving in case something happens. Because every night that we went to work, or every day that we went to work, every shift that we were on, that was a possibility of death. We left there and then moved to New Jersey, which I hated for every minute.
Hey.
I never understood a jug hammer.
Oh.
So
It's a circle.
So on 9/11, I was actually on my way to the World Trade Center to testify in court. When the planes hit, I was actually on 95, headed to New York. We couldn't get in touch with each other, my wife nor I. So what we had to do at that time was figure out how we can get in touch with each other. Later on, when everything came up, we then decided that we really needed to put more of our stuff in order because of our jobs. And at that time, we had just had a baby. We needed to make sure that this child, if something happens to both of us, that she is taken care of, that she's provided for, that everything that she needed is there. So we had to line all that up. And with Compassion and Choices coming in some years later, gave us all the resources that we really needed. So as pastor, my biggest thing is to push the information out, to get the information to my congregation, to the community, to all the constituents that's within my area, to make sure that they have information. Set the stuff up, set it up. My father, before he died, he said, son, I'm turning everything over to you because you are the eldest. That was my responsibility coming out of the South as the eldest boy, eldest male. So I had to take on that responsibility. And I actually had to preach his eulogy when he died. But the biggest thing that I would say is that we just got to get the information out. In the African-American community, Malcolm X said, if you don't want us to know anything, put it in the book. So what we have to do now is be able to disseminate this information that Compassion Choices has given us, that Kim has given us, that Brandy and Donna and them have all provided for us. Get that information out. The pulpit on Sunday mornings is our central location. That's our X. I think that's what they call it now. Mm-hmm. That's our Twitter. That's our Facebook. That Sunday morning is where we can give all the information to our folks. And as leaders, as African-American leaders in our communities, our voices carry a lot of weight. So we need to be able to make sure that when we're talking to our folk, that we're giving them the correct information, where they can go find this information, and this is who you can trust. That's it.
Thank you so much. I want to encourage our audience to put questions in the chat as we get ready for our Q&A. I don't even know why I wrote down all these questions for a panel of pastors and ministers, but I would love to just get our, we have about 5 minutes left. But to talk about, one of the things we find is that when I first started this work, people would say, oh, people are really reluctant to talk about death and dying. People don't want to talk about it. But that's not what I have found. I have found that if you create the space for people to do it, they want to have the conversations. And often there is not even the realization that we can chart our own end of life. It's the thought that in many ways we've ceded end of life to the professionals. And so the thought that we can do what we want to do for our memorial service or, plan the treat, know what interventions we want at the end of life or do anything creative just doesn't get into anyone's mind. But then when we talk about it, people are like, okay, I can do this. And so I would love to know, how do you counsel people to really think about their faith, their values, and their stories when they're at the end of life and to think about at the end of life? And anybody can jump in.
That's a great question. I want to jump in first, in large part because Reverend Kevin told me that we need to bring down the patriarchy. We have a good time together, but that's a real thing. I want to point out that Black folks have natural avenues to these discussions through our cultures. And I do say plural cultures. Back to kind of pluralism and why we have to broaden this conversation to include more than just Christians is largely because there's an ancestral veneration tradition in our culture that we have been dissuaded against. We've been convinced by people who honor their ancestors. I was just walking around DuPont Circle this morning. I took my dog for a quick little jaunt and I counted the number of busts of old white men all around here, on horses and stuff, right? Culturally, white folks venerate their ancestors. And yet and still, as people of African traditions, African culture, heritage, and lineage, we were taught by the white folks who enslaved us and then enforced Jim Crow segregation against us and all of the things, right? I'm all for us all coming together, holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but we got to deal with history for what it is. We were taught that it was evil and wrong to honor our ancestors. And there are people still in our churches who believe that, who are still in our mosques, in masjids, in synagogues that believe that. We've got to deal with that lie, break it down for what it is, and help people to understand that this is a part of life. And if we can understand that we still have this ongoing life in some of our belief systems after death, then maybe the conversation becomes a little bit easier, because every morning I go and pour water for my daddy and my sister, and I have a conversation with my other ancestors. My son is learning that this is a practice that is meaningful, and mommy feels better when she walks away from there. That is an important part, I think, of what we can do in our churches. The local church where I worship now, we have a table up front for libations. And we actually have taught on what that means and why it is okay for you to come and take a cup of water and pour a little water in that plant and call your ancestors' name. If we had some traditions like that, it would be so much easier to have a conversation about, well, Big Mama's got dementia now. We see it, we all see it. Do y'all have what you need in place? Because you know, in a minute, Big Mama might not be able to articulate, share, even just decide the things the same way. And then if we can share, that's why I started with the importance of story, because if we share from story, it's humanized. It's not philosophical. It's not abstract. It's not people, our folks need to know that the person in front of them is credible, because we've been taken advantage of so very much historically. And a lot of what happens, I believe, is simply distrust, and it's out of wisdom. I honestly believe that. In many of our communities, we have been exploited, we have been tricked, we have been, the information's been hitting from us. Our relationship to the written word is a historical tension, right? We weren't allowed to have education. So why are we unclear about why certain folks in our communities, I don't want to write it down. I don't want to lock it up. I don't want to go to the bank. That's some wisdom. And we have to actually honor the wisdom and then redirect it, right?
Yeah.
Because now we know that there are some things that we can put in place to protect. And if our folks recognize that we're coming from compassion and giving choice, then that makes a huge difference. That's why I love the work that you all are doing. Glad to be a part. Thank you for having it.
And if I could dive in really quick. So she teaches libation to her son. I taught it to my mother. And so when my youngest brother died, because he wasn't church going, loved Bob Marley, was a dude of the streets, but still had a compassionate heart. My mother wanted,
I like Bob Marley.
right, see? So we played Lively Up Yourself and One Love at his funeral, and my mother wanted libation poured, and our Baptist pastor would not let it be poured in the church. So she said, so we're not burying him in your church then. And
That's right.
a church she'd been in 42 years became your church all of a sudden. And she took it to a funeral home where we poured libation, where she wore an African gele and da-da-da. And he still preached the sermon. She said, you're welcome to come, but we poured libation. And that, one of the things that we have to honor is the way that we honor, like that talented 10th thing. Well, that baby's so smart. That baby's so smart. Oh, he know what he doing. That kind of thing works for us. So when you sit before the people and say, I have some information for you, the church stops to receive it. And so if we would come with that sense of commitment, that sense of clarity, that sense of, Sister May Rank fries the chicken, Brother Paul, is the trash man, but he knows how. If we would just honor, because remember, and much to what Reverend Roslyn said, Reverend Roslyn, like church was the place where we got honor. You had to wear a maid's uniform and a porter's uniform all week at church. You were Deacon Smith at church. You was, Deaconess Paula. You know what I mean? And you became somebody. If we come to the table with that same sense of reverence for each other, we listen. And when those alerts go up, I've got information for you. People will grab hold to it like it's lotto tickets. They really will. We have to do it with that sense of, just another sad time. But, doing the work I do, didn't, Lord, when we came back to church, didn't we have our mobile unit show up to give out COVID vaccines? I was like, I ain't telling you what to do, but what you've been telling me is some of y'all work during the week and can't get to it. Well, Muhammad, there's the mountain. And we had a line down the street because a lot of it was more, I couldn't get to it than it was the stuff that Dr. Malmo was saying and Ms. Lilly was saying earlier about this, the Tuskegee experiment. Once people unpacked that and were like, oh, that doesn't make any sense, or I heard different now, they wanted access. Then they couldn't get the access.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have the doctor, they didn't have the clinic. So we had the access and we brought it. And that's when somebody will bring their cousin, the cousin will bring their kids, the kids will bring their friends, and so on.
Yeah, this is a conversation that we can continue. We're transitioning to the Q&A. And I see we have a question right up front. Oh, hold on 1 second for our microphone.
He said, click it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all the information. First of all, I'm a minister. That's kind of like about 5 down of what I do. That's not the main thing I do, but I do public affairs radio, public affairs writing, public affairs rallies, etc. And there are times I want to use similar messages in church, but is it wrong not to use a lot of Bible verses when you are trying to make your point. I mean, I know a lot of things, but I can't point to something in the Bible that says this is what we ought to do. And I know a lot of people like to have a lot of Bible verses quoted, but I think I'm making my case without all the Bible verses. Am I wrong?
Let's talk about Bible intention, right? Because a lot of times, I don't mean to be the quick shocker, because we just dealt with this on Sunday. The race is not given to the swift or to the, to the fast, but the one that endures to the end. That's not in the Bible. The
Right.
first part of it is, the second part isn't. Godliness is next to cleanliness, is not in the Bible. So at the end of the day, your heart is what matters. And as a vessel that has the intention to get the information to people, people want the God vessel, right? I'd rather have your Ruth heart, your Miriam heart, your heart than, oh, wait, now in case you need to go back to it, go here, because we hope that they go where you send them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
If-
Anyone else?
I kind of use both. If there's a Bible verse that I can apply to when I'm talking, that's pretty much what I use. I'm involved in a lot of political stuff, and a lot of pastors just don't believe in it. But I say, Jesus was killed because of politics. So I think what you have to do
Right?
is figure
Okay.
out a way, a Bible verse that will connect to what you're trying to get over, or what type of information you're trying to provide to the congregation.
And I think it's okay to not. If you
Yeah.
don't feel that conviction,
Right.
if that's not what you are being called to do in that moment, I think that the scripture is the word embodied. And that's you.
I'll hijack a lyric.
Go ahead.
Because it's important that after I've spoken, that they have reminders throughout the week when they leave there. And I hope they read scripture. Heck, I hope I read scripture. But I know they'll hear this song, right? And when that song, they hear it, it's almost as if God's speaking to them again. So sometimes I attach myself to a lyric. I'll preach McFadden and Whitehead till I die.
Come on, sir.
Ain't no stopping us now, right? And then people can just chime on in. And there's so many people, hip hop has gifted us with that.
Yeah.
So many beautiful
many
and wonderful artists. So I prefer to let my parishioners leave with a song, a lyric, a quote, or anything to go along with the scripture.
Thank you.
And just to follow up on that, sometimes I'm listening to the young folk. Now, I'm not a hip hop person. I'm strictly R&B, gospel, but if it helps my young folk
Yeah.
in the church to understand, I can tolerate it.
We have a question
Yeah.
from one of our people listening in on a virtual audience. It's from Miss Mia Waugh. I am seeking wisdom pertaining to best practices for assisting an individual / family members that solely rely on faith, void of life-saving medical interventions or logic. How can they be assisted in that instance? I welcome all personal and professional experience.
Faith without works is dead. Right? And so there are times indeed when the word works wonders. And sometimes, I remember my mother used to say, you don't be so heavenly bound that you have no earthly good,
Yes.
right? And so at the end of the day, if God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a love, power, and sound mind. And so we got to be willing to walk people into stuff that they think God is trying to coast them into, right? That God sent you to me, for me to be able to say this to you, for me to then be able to connect you to so-and-so, right? And all of that is the work of God. So I get the heart of the Christian, the follower of the teachings of Christ, who wants to float into heaven, but we got to walk there.
David gets up with the Psalms. David relied on history and the stories and traditions, and also his experience and what he knew about God. And so I think experience, my knowledge of God trumps anything anyone else can tell me at any time, knowing that it was God who sustained me. And that's my story. Go tell your story. But my story is one of knowing how God has aided me. And I think that there has to be room for our stories.
Mm.
Yeah.
My grandmother put it best. Sometimes you just got to wait on the Lord.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? I see that we need a whole faith engagement day for CNC. So that needs to be our next big event. But yes, I have one
think so,
Missy
yeah.
over there.
I was just interested in finding out how you utilize your health ministries at your churches to engage your communities in regards to people with your congregations who have life-limiting illnesses? Thank you.
Can I'll start because I think I'm the only one up here who's not necessarily doing ministry in a church context. I'm doing ministry on a college campus. I am doing ministry in grassroots movements across the country. I'm doing ministry with folks who would never step into a church. So for me, I believe that we've got to be willing to try something different. We can't continue to do the same things over and over again and expect different results. So what I'm doing is actually getting out into the community, actually trying to develop health justice ministries on the street, making sure that when our young people, largely our young people, but any of our people are being killed by the police, largely that's the context in which I work. I'm working with families who are grieving, and we're not expecting to be grieving losing their children. So the health justice ministry that we're doing is, okay, so now that this has happened and it has uprooted everything that you were finding stability in your life around, what do we do? A lot of times I work with some amazing community organizers who are often just following the leading of the Spirit in the moment. Sometimes we have a planned out agenda, but sometimes we just praying. Sometimes we just walking to the scene of the crime. Sometimes we're actually just going to that corner, that block, and pouring libations because we know that there was a violent trauma that occurred here and that a spirit is in need of release. So we do that work. So mine is more outside of a church context. I like to do churchy things sometimes, but I'm one of those preachers who is doing it a little bit differently.
Well, oh, you go ahead. No, 'cause I'm
And we have 1 minute left.
My
They're
numbers
gonna
were up, so I
come
had
get
to
us.
have another prostate procedure. It came back in my good favor. But my first prostate exam was at a health fair at my church in the gym 20 years ago. With people there, men who had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, giving support to those who they were trying to get to have a prostate exam. So I think that their health ministries, when they are healthy, are looking at the issues that our parishioners are dealing with, and we have to face it. We look past our wealth, that whatever you're going through on any Sunday, there's someone in that congregation, someone in your pew who's gone through the same thing. If you are parenting a single parent, there's someone in your church who can give you a word of advice on that. But I think that we have to, and we did this during COVID too.
Yeah.
My office, identified churches, and we had faith and vaccine clinics in our crucial wards. We were giving the vaccine and testing people and brought clergy together. We even brought Dr. Fauci with clergy at Washington Cathedral to have a faith in the vaccine to counter some of the false narratives there. But there are some health ministries, but we need more of them, and there are more who can help others to do the essential work in our communities.
Thank you so much. We are out of time, but this has been such a rich conversation, and I'm so grateful for all of your wisdom and perspectives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You knew it? Yep. I just passed on community.
No, Reverend, we're not pulling you off, not at all. Your spirit remains. I hope that you all really enjoyed that panel. It was wonderful. Dr. Hall, we're back. And we have the results of poll number 2, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a great time to share because it really kind of surmises all of that we've been talking about. It kind of brings it all to a head here. So we're going to look at some of these results. For the first question, you know, we were asking people kind of who is doing this currently right now in our communities, that's online, that's in this space. How many of you have completed your advanced directives, also known as a living will? So, oh, yes, thank you. We asked how many people have completed their advanced directives, also known as a living will. And here we see that 15 said no, they've never done it before. 11 said yes. And 21 said, I have started but not finished. And 0 said they don't know what that is. So really, when you look at that, it's about 47 people total, and half have started. About 50 people, so about half have started, and about you know, almost a little over a quarter you know, have never started. So that right there shows you really the importance of what we're talking about and the need to get this going for our listeners.
Right. So I'd like for the folks at home to throw into the chat, now that you've spent this wonderful day with us and it is coming to a close, how many of you who have not done your advance directives or identified your power of attorney would be willing to do that? Okay, you could throw that in the chat.
Excellent. I love that. And the next question we had is, have you completed your, have you identified your power of attorney? So again, we have 12 people right saying no, never, 21 saying yes, 14 saying I have started but not finished. Okay. So even, you know, this idea of getting it started but not completing it is something that we heard a lot of the panelists talk about today. And we're seeing in the chat that people from this conversation are willing to do both. So that's excellent.
Right, absolutely. Have you identified your healthcare proxy, right? Who's going to be the person who is going to make decisions if you're no longer willing, if you're no longer able to do that? And so why don't you share those results? And we see from Cynthia Harris, she said her mom, but we see people really want to start doing this. So mission accomplished, just getting people thinking about it, just getting people going.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Dr.
absolutely. And I think here we have even more people that are saying, you know, this is actually the most that have said yes. They've identified a healthcare proxy, which is actually, that is a very good number. And so I think to your point and the point of the folks here, you know, it's like you have to kind of break it down into pieces and chunks and digestible chunks. And this is a digestible chunk that looks like people have identified their proxy more than they have potentially started their will.
Reverend Kev, you have something you want to say real quick?
Perhaps on Sunday, and one of those, you know, cupcakes and coffee, have the notary public, because a lot of people are starting it but not finishing because they didn't know what to do next. So we could have the final resource there, then it could help the process.
Well, that's great. And Kim and Brandy are actually going to be sharing some resources in just a bit, especially Brandy. We have a couple of comments real quick. Why don't we pass that microphone around? By the way, Karen Thomas, thank you, Karen, says outstanding presentation. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you, Karen, for being part of it. Yes, good
Yeah.
doctor.
Yes. Thinking about the endorsement of the health proxy, I'm one of the people who said yes to that, but no to the others. And it made me think about comments that people have shared throughout the day about meeting people where they are. I'm wondering if that number is so high because, as was the case with myself, my primary care physician asked me about that repeatedly. And so that got taken care of as part of regular course of medical treatment. And thinking about what you were saying, Elisha, about breaking this process down into digestible chunks and thinking about where within our village and our ecosystems, the professionals can insert and kind of help us along. Like I'm thinking about my accountant as the person who is always asking about, the legacy leaving or the financial part, but just thinking about the entire ecosystem and where and when we can enter.
Thank you for that.
Very quickly, I just wanted to share a couple other free estate planning resources. AARP provides free gift planning. ACLU provides estate planning resources on their website. And then we're also with the American Bar Association provides a number of free estate planning resources. Honestly, there's several sources. They're not all equally credible. I highlighted those three because I know they are credible. And I think that there are a number of resources that Brandy and Zeena are working to put together with this in mind so that we can use it in our local context. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Rev.
As this poll has indicated, there's a lot of thought put behind it, but very little action. So right now we need to have action meetings where we can bring people together to execute the plan. And even if you are digesting the process bit by bit, just know that these are documents that can always be changed, adjusted, and you can create addendums at any given time when your situation changes, or if you had different conversations with your families, or even your accountants or your attorneys to make this easier for you. But action is absolutely needed and necessary. One of the things I offer to my clients is the access to elder law attorneys, because in my experience, they handle things from soup to nuts. And so you can have different portions of these conversations and they're executing the action along the way. So that's just my 2 cents on this. Action is absolutely necessary and needed.